My sister stole my fiancé. 10 years later, she marked my life. But then she met my husband. I never imagined a single phone call could turn my world upside down. But that's exactly what happened. It was a cool, crisp spring morning in New York City when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated, but something about it made me answer. The voice on the other end hit me like a punch in the stomach, unmistakable. Though years had passed. "Samantha, it's Isabella," she said, her tone oddly formal, yet laced with a sense of something darker, something I couldn't place. "Isabella," I replied, trying to steady my breath. "What's going on?" She was calling to inform me that our grandmother had passed away, a death that shook me to my core. But as I listened to her, I realized there was something more, a hidden agenda beneath her words. "I just wanted to let you know," she said, her voice sweet with a touch of mockery. "I'm sure you're busy with your little life, keeping to yourself. I thought you'd want to know." I could almost hear her smirk through the phone, the words laced with bitterness. Her comment stung, but I tried to mask my emotions. "Thank you for letting me know. I'll make arrangements to come," I said, my voice steady, though inside I was seething. It wasn't just the words that hurt. It was the memories they dug up. Memories of a childhood where Isabella always shone brightest. She had our father's favor, and a kind of effortless charm that made everything fall into place for her. As for me, no matter how hard I tried, I was always in her shadow, unnoticed and unimportant. Our relationship had been broken for years after she took David from me. The moment she entered the picture, everything shifted. David Parker was supposed to be my future, my everything. But Isabella, with her manipulative ways, had stolen him right from under my nose. The betrayal had left a scar that time had done little to heal. I severed ties with her, and with my family in the process. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung. It was the years of unequal treatment. The favoritism that had always been so painfully clear. David had been my fiancé, my love, and together we had planned a life. Until Isabella swept in, took him, and shattered everything. Our family had always been fractured. Our father, cold and distant, had always favored Isabella for her resemblance to him, a quiet, unspoken bond. My mother, though kind, had been trapped in the middle, torn between her two daughters, always trying to show support, but always leaning toward Isabella's side. And so, I'd learned to live without them, to build my life alone. After the breakup, I carved out a new direction for myself. I left my position as a marketing manager to focus on building a life that truly mattered. My husband, Aaron, was a kind-hearted environmental engineer who valued depth over status. Together, we built a warm life in a quiet coastal town, far from the noise of the city. Our 7-year-old son, Elias, was our little miracle, curious, full of questions, and already showing a deep love for music. He even had a small podcast with his dad where they explored sounds of nature. Even with all the love surrounding me, Isabella's call stirred up feelings I thought I'd buried long ago. The idea of returning to our childhood, a state for the memorial, gave me a knot in my stomach. It had been nearly a decade since I last stepped foot there. Our grandmother had always been the only soul in the family who really saw me. Her passing didn't just mean grief. It marked the closing of the only door that had ever been open to me. In the days that followed, I packed in silence. My mind tugged between memories and the fear of what awaited. I wasn't just going to say goodbye to my grandmother. I was returning to the stage, where so many of my wounds were first formed. I couldn't shake the suspicion that Isabella's call hadn't been just a gesture of courtesy. There was always something layered in her tone, something unreadable. When the day came, I stood at the edge of the estate's long driveway, looking up at the same ivy-covered brickwork I remembered from childhood. The house hadn't changed, and yet everything inside me had. I could almost hear our past echoing. Through the old walls, the whispered secrets, the slammed doors, the quiet tears at midnight. Inside, the air was thick with remembrance and veiled tension. I moved through the somber crowd, catching glances from people I once called family, some genuine, others veiled in politeness. And then I saw her, Isabella, dressed to impress, her aura untouched by the years. She laughed softly, surrounded by admirers, still captivating, still controlling the room without lifting a finger. I watched her from a distance, feeling the old dynamic snap back into place like a trap I'd stepped into. And right in the middle of the final tribute, She approached, sliding beside me like nothing had changed. "Samantha," she said, voice sugar-coated, smile precise. "How long has it been?" I turned toward her with a calm mask. "Long enough," I replied. Her laugh was light, rehearsed. "Life has a funny way of circling back, doesn't it?" I nodded, but her words carried the same current of competition they always had. Nothing had truly changed. Not with her. I knew this wasn't just about saying goodbye to our grandmother. It was about reckoning with the past, with Isabella, and with the choices that had shaped who we had become. The betrayal, the silence, the years of distance, none of it could be buried now. I had no idea that what began as a funeral would unravel truths I hadn't been ready to face. In the days before the service, tension hung thick in the air. I tried to stay grounded in my routine's air and steady support. Elias's bedtime stories, our morning walks by the pier. But no matter how I tried, the thought of seeing Isabella again shadowed everything. I had built a life far away from the games and cold glances of our childhood. But now, I was being pulled back into it. On the morning of the memorial, the sky over Manhattan was a soft, stubborn grey. The brownstone where we'd all gathered hadn't changed, with its ivy-wrapped railings and tall windows still staring blankly out at the street. Inside, the rooms felt smaller than I remembered, yet somehow heavier, crowded with the weight of older whispers, forgotten laughter, and buried tensions. As I stepped into the main room, I felt at her gaze. Isabella's presence was as commanding as ever, dressed in sleek black, her expression unreadable, polished, poised, and magnetic. She looked every bit the woman who'd made it out clean. But I knew better. Her surface shimmered, but underneath was still the same cold steel I'd grown up learning to flinch from. It didn't take long before she came to me, weaving through the murmurs and half hugs. "Hey Lana," she said, her voice gentle but sharpened just enough. "You look different." "I've changed," I replied simply, managing a tight smile. "Life has a way of doing that, doesn't it?" she said, her eyes scanning me as though I were a new exhibit. "I've been meaning to catch up. It's been too long." I nodded. "It has." She paused for effect, then with a half shrug added, "I'm sure you've heard bits and pieces about my life. Things are busy." Her tone made it sound like everyone should be envious. I hadn't kept tabs on her, but my parents' holiday calls often came with unsolicited updates, her new penthouse, her clients in Hollywood, her latest investment. It all sounded too curated to be real. Throughout the wake, Isabella seemed to orbit the room with deliberate ease, drawing people in with stories of her life in Los Angeles. She spoke of designer galas and art collectors, of yoga retreats and philanthropic ventures, always just loud enough to be overheard. She wasn't just remembering our grandmother, she was staging a performance. But beneath that practiced shine, I could see the cracks. Her eyes flinched just slightly when someone mentioned David Parker, my ex-fiancé, her ex-husband. She tossed his name into conversations like it meant nothing, like it hadn't once meant everything to me. The way she spoke of him offhand, dismissive, was a show of strength, but it rang hollow. She wanted me to know she'd won, and then lost, and now pretended not to care. Yet every word about him was like a paper cut reopening. David had once been the axis around which my world spun. We'd dreamed in tandem of shared mornings, of a family, of a quiet home somewhere far from the noise. Until Isabella, with her sharpened charm and talent for devastation, took him. Not by accident, not by fate, but with intention. The betrayal didn't just shatter. My heart-tipped dismantled my trust in everything I thought was solid. And seeing her now, speaking of her curated life as though none of it had consequences, made my skin prickle. I needed answers, not out of hope, but to cut the last tether between us. As the room began to thin, and the low hum of condolences faded into silence, I stepped toward her, catching her near the old bookshelf by the bay window. "Isabella," I said, steady but firm, "can we talk?" She turned, her lips pulling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course," she said, voice velvety but edged with something darker. "What's on your mind?" I glanced around, then back at her. "I need to understand something. Why did you do it?" She blinked, playing innocent. "Why did you take David from me?" Her posture shifted, elegance replaced by something steelier. "I didn't take anything," she said, smoothly. "David and we had a connection. Maybe one you never noticed?" I laughed softly, bitterly. "You manipulated him. You knew exactly what you were doing. She tilted her head, gaze unwavering. David made his own choices. Maybe he wanted something different. Life doesn't pause for the people left behind. Her words hit like stones. You always had a way of making destruction sound noble, I said quietly. Isabella folded her arms, the mask slipping. You act like I stole something from you. But maybe if you'd been more present, more decisive, things would have played out differently. Don't pin your regrets on me. It wasn't just about David. It had never been. You still don't get it, I said, my voice tight. This wasn't just about a man. This was about how you were always the chosen one, the golden child. The one who looked like Dad, who spoke like him, cold, controlled, favored. Her jaw tensed, while I was left to figure out how to survive in a family that never saw me unless I was bleeding. Her expression darkened, the polite facade cracking. But before she could reply, we were interrupted some distant cousins, entering the room with awkward, half smiles and murmurs of departure. I stepped back, giving her one last glance before walking away. Our conversation, like everything else between us, unfinished. The rest of the evening passed in a blurred faces. Repeated condolences, the scent of Lily lingering in every room. But my mind stayed fixed on that moment. Her deflection, her truth. The following morning, as the final service came to a close and the brownstone emptied, I felt an odd mix of release and unrest. Isabella's perfect life, with all its careful scaffolding, was beginning to shift. The cracks were there now, visible if you look closely enough. And I would be watching. Because this wasn't just a funeral. It was the beginning of something neither of us had seen coming. I left the funeral that spring morning in New York City with a heavy heart, but also with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The ceremony was over, the rituals complete, but the truth, that was only beginning to surface. My confrontation with Isabella had cracked something open, and I wasn't going to let it close again. In the days that followed, an eerie calm settled over my life. Not peace, something more hollow. I kept replaying that moment with her in my head. The cold deflection in her voice, the way her eyes never truly saw fun. Every word she'd said echoed with deeper meaning, as if hiding behind them were years of secrets waiting to be unearthed. My mother called once. Her voice was tired, and her apology, while sincere, felt like putting a bandage on a wound that had long since turned into scar tissue. It was never just about what had been said, it was about the silence. The years of dismissal, the way she always looked to Isabella for approval and left me reaching for scraps. John and Lily became my quiet strength during this time. They didn't ask questions. They just stayed close, offering laughter, warmth, and the safety of the everyday. Lily poured herself into her YouTube channel, as always, filling her sketchbooks with soft colors and bright stories. Her joy, untouched by the past, became a small light in the emotional storm I was navigating. But the peace didn't last long. Isabella, ever the actress, couldn't resist a spotlight. Just days after the funeral, she took to social media with her usual flair post dressed in designer gloss, captions dripping in sarcasm. Without naming names, she made her target obvious. Phrases like "some people live such quiet little lives, it's almost sweet." I could hear her voice in every word, like a knife dipped in honey. Karma. I should have let it go, but I was tired of letting things go. That night, as I sat beside Lily while she edited her next video, something clicked. What if we made something different? I asked. She looked up from her tablet, curious. Like what? Something real. Something kind but clear. The truth. We crafted the video together. It wasn't an attack. It didn't even mention Isabella by name. But it painted a different picture, one of resilience, of quiet strength, of building something beautiful with less. Lily's artwork, paired with our voiceover, told the story of how small things like healing, like family, matter more than appearances. We uploaded it with no expectations. But the internet doesn't sleep. The video began to gain traction slowly, then all at once. The comments were flooded with support. And then came the shift. People began drawing connections. They started asking questions under Isabella's posts. Inconsistencies were pointed out. The tone of her followers shifted from admiration to suspicion. The perfect image sheet, so carefully constructed, began to buckle under the weight of scrutiny. And it didn't stop there. David, caught in the fallout, began to unravel. He'd been trying to keep a low profile since our confrontation. But social media has long memories and sharper claws. His name began appearing in threads, tied to both his failed marriage and his role in what people now call the betrayal. The pressure followed him to the office, where a careless mistake cost him his job. The man who once walked beside me with such quiet ambition now stood in the wreckage of choices he couldn't take back. And Isabella? She did what she always did when control slipped from her fingers. She acted. She filed for divorce. No press release. No dramatic announcement. Just a signature on paper, and another mask dropped. It was over for them. And for me. For the first time, I wasn't surviving in someone else's shadow. I wasn't the forgotten sister, the quiet one. I was the woman who had rebuilt her life with bare hands and honest words. I had no illusions left about family, but I had truth. I had Lily, I had a future that no one else could steal. And that was enough. For now, their son, James, became collateral damage in the storm Isabella had created, with her world unraveling and her emotional state growing increasingly erratic. The court placed James in the supervised care facility far from the penthouse lifestyle she used to flaunt, like a badge of superiority. It was a sobering turn of events. The perfect picture she once painted had cracked wide open, revealing the fragility beneath all that gloss. The family dynamic was shifting fast. One morning, just days after the dust began to settle, my mother reached out. We met at a quiet cafe near Central Park Neutral Ground. She looked older somehow, not just in years but in spirit, as if regret had finally caught up to her. "I'm sorry for everything, Samantha," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Truly, we should have seen you. Heard you. I see now how wrong we were." Her eyes were glassy, full of remorse. And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. But belief didn't erase the past. The wound she spoke of ran deep, and healing would take more than a few words over coffee. I nodded, "Thank you. I appreciate that." But I knew my boundaries. I offered her grace, but not full access. From that point forward, our relationship became cordial, distant, but no longer hostile. I was choosing peace, not punishment. John and I needed that peace. So we did something we hadn't done in months. We stepped away from it all. No more news, no social media, no family drama. Just us. We surprised Lily with a trip to Coney Island. A day to just be together. No ghosts from the past. Just laughter, sticky cotton candy fingers, and the sound of Lily's joy echoing through the spring air. The sunlight on her face as she raced from one ride to the next reminded me what really mattered. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were living. The trip was exactly what we needed, a moment of reprieve, of connection. It reminded us that even after the chaos, there were still pieces of joy to be claimed. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of real healing. The weeks that followed brought a gentle calm I hadn't known in years. My life, once tangled in the knots of family dysfunction and betrayal, was finally finding its rhythm again. I looked around at our little apartment filled with laughter, love, and Lily's endless stream of drawings, and realized we had built something real. Isabella's descent was painful to witness, even for me, but it was also revealing. Her obsession with appearances, her attempts to tear me down, it had all come full circle. The divorce, the loss of custody, the backlash, these were consequences of choices long made. And David? He faded into the background, struggling to regain his footing after losing his job. He became a shadow in my story, a lesson more than a loss. But I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt distance. My energy now belonged to my family, my real one. John and I had grown stronger through every test. We were partners not just in love, but in resilience. And Lily was blossoming. Her YouTube channel had become a small haven for others, full of art, kindness, and light. Watching her create, watching her grow, it reminded me that healing often starts with the smallest joys. One afternoon, while she was sketching by the window and John was making coffee, I paused and looked around. This quiet, content moment was the life I had fought for. Not glamorous, not loud, but honest, whole. And finally, mine. One quiet spring morning in New York City, as sunlight filtered softly through the apartment windows, I opened a letter from my mother. Her handwriting, once so firm, had softened. In it, she expressed sorrow for how everything had unraveled between us. She asked for forgiveness, her words heavy with regret. There was sincerity in her tone. But I had learned that forgiveness is not a doorway you walk through all at once. It's a long hallway, and I was still somewhere in the middle of it. I responded with grace. I acknowledged her apology and let her know I appreciated her reaching out. But I was clear, rebuilding trust would take time. Time and consistency. The fractures in our family weren't just surface level, they ran deep. Carved by years of favoritism, silence, and denial. Growing up, Isabella had always been the chosen one. My father, cold and unreachable, had seen himself in her ambition and manipulative charm. I, on the other hand, reminded him too much of the softness. He detested my empathy, my quiet. So I became the shadow, and she, the spotlight. That dynamic shaped everything. It blinded my mother, made her complicit in ways she never fully admitted until now. And it left me craving the kind of love that didn't come with conditions or comparisons. The betrayal when Isabella swept in and took David wasn't just about a man. It was about losing the one person who had made me feel seen. It broke something in me. And though I had built a beautiful life since, that scar remained. Time hadn't erased it. It had simply taught me to carry it with more strength. But in that strength, I had found something unexpected: clarity. My life with John and Lily wasn't just a consolation. It was a masterpiece of resilience. The storm I had survived with them by my side had deepened our bond in ways that only adversity can. We moved through our days with intention: morning walks in Central Park, silly conversations at the dinner table, the glow of Lily's laughter spilling into every corner of our home. As summer edged toward fall, I felt a shift within me, a stirring. I wanted to do something meaningful with everything I'd lived through, not just survive it but use it. So I began laying the foundation for a community initiative, a program designed to help families navigate emotional conflict, heal generational wounds, and rebuild trust. It was my way of turning pain into purpose, of giving others what I once needed so badly: guidance, hope, and a reminder that healing was possible, even after the worst storms. Looking back now, it's almost hard to believe how far we've come. From the confrontation at my grandmother's funeral to the media fallout that followed. From the secrets exposed to the cold truths that could no longer be hidden. Isabella's fall from grace had been dramatic, but it was never the centerpiece of this story. The real story was in the rebuilding. The quiet victories. The small acts of love that stitched our days back together. The inner resolve that reminded me I never needed the validation I spent so long chasing. In the end, Isabella's unraveling became a cautionary tale, not just for the family, but for me. A reminder of what happens when envy rules and truth is ignored. But my life, it became something else entirely. It became mine. With John's steady presence beside me, Lily's vibrant spirit lighting our path, and a project that gave new meaning to our pain, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had stopped looking for permission to live fully. I had built something beautiful on my own terms. And as I looked toward the future, I knew this chapter was just the beginning of something even greater. I felt a deep sense of conviction that the future was ours to craft. As I looked ahead, I carried with me the unwavering belief that, no matter what obstacles we might face, the strength and resilience of my family would be the compass that guided us forward.